The sun was setting over Riverdale, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple as Thomas Wilson stepped off the bus with his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. At 45, with salt and pepper hair cut short and a sturdy build that spoke of regular exercise, he looked more like a high school football coach than what he really was, a decorated police veteran with 20 years of experience in big city departments. Thomas had arrived a day earlier than expected. He wanted to get a feel for this small town before officially starting his new job as police chief on Monday. The town council had hired him after a nationwide search, specifically looking for someone who could bring fresh perspective to a department struggling with community relations. Might as well see the real Riverdale, he thought, deciding to walk through town rather than calling a taxi. The map on his phone showed his hotel was just 2 miles away, and after sitting on buses and planes all day, the walk would do him good. As he walked, Thomas noticed how the neat downtown area gradually gave way to more worn-down neighborhoods. Store signs became less fancy, houses more in need of paint and repair. He wasn't judging. Every town had its struggling areas. In fact, these were exactly the places he wanted to understand better. Thomas slowed his pace when he reached Pine Street, taking mental notes about the neighborhood. Kids played basketball using a milk crate nailed to a telephone pole. A group of older men sat on plastic chairs outside a corner store, playing chess and talking loudly. 2 women chatted across porches while keeping eyes on toddlers who rode tricycles on the sidewalk. Community, Thomas thought. Real community. This wasn't the troubled area the town council had described with worried faces. Yes, the buildings needed work, but he could see neighbors looking out for each other. This was important information for a new police chief to have. He stopped to watch the basketball game, smiling as a skinny boy no more than 12 made an impressive shot. The kid reminded him of his own nephew back home. "You play?" the boy called out, noticing Thomas watching. "Used to," Thomas answered with a laugh, "but I'm too old to keep up with you now." The boy grinned and went back to his game. Thomas continued walking, feeling good about the interaction. Building trust started with small moments like this. He didn't notice the police cruiser that had slowed down behind him until he heard a voice call out through a speaker. "You there with the bag. Stop and turn around slowly." Thomas stopped, surprised but not alarmed. He turned to see a patrol car with 2 officers inside, watching him carefully. He understood immediately. A stranger in a neighborhood where everyone knew each other was bound to draw attention. This was just good policing. "Good evening, officers," he said calmly, making sure his hands were visible. The 2 officers stepped out of the car. One was tall and heavy-set with a ruddy face, maybe in his late 30s. The other was younger, thinner, and looked nervous. Neither seemed to recognize him, which made sense. Thomas had only met with the mayor, town council, and the current chief during his interviews. "What's your business in this neighborhood?" the older officer asked, hand resting casually on his belt near his holster. "Just passing through," Thomas replied, "heading to the Riverdale Inn for the night." The younger officer frowned. "That's on the other side of town. Why are you walking through here?" Thomas kept his voice friendly. "I'm new to town, wanted to see different neighborhoods. I'm actually ID." The older officer cut him off, extending his hand. Thomas slowly reached for his back pocket, then realized with a sinking feeling that his wallet was in his duffel bag, packed away after buying a sandwich at the airport. He'd been using his phone to pay for things. "I need to get my wallet from my bag," he explained. "Keep your hands where we can see them," the older officer said, voice hardening. "What's really going on here? We got calls about someone suspicious walking around." Thomas took a deep breath. "Officers, I understand your concern, but there's been a misunderstanding. My name is Thomas Wilson. I'm your new police chief starting Monday. My ID is in my bag." Both officers stared at him. The older one let out a short laugh. "Right, and I'm the mayor. Put the bag down slowly and step back." Thomas carefully placed his duffel on the ground. "I'm telling the truth. Call Chief Rodriguez if you need to verify. He knows I was arriving this weekend." The younger officer looked uncertain, but the older one seemed annoyed. "We've got a wise guy here pretending to be the new chief." "I'm not pretending," Thomas said firmly. "Just call—" "Hands on the car," the older officer ordered, patience clearly gone. Thomas knew he should comply and sort this out at the station. But something in the officer's tone, the disrespect, the unwillingness to even check his story, sparked a moment of resistance. "Officer, I need you to listen. I am your new—" He didn't finish the sentence. The older officer grabbed his arm roughly, spinning him toward the patrol car. Thomas instinctively pulled back, a human reaction, not resistance. But that slight movement was all it took. He's resisting, the younger officer shouted, rushing forward. What happened next unfolded with frightening speed. Thomas found himself pushed face down on the hood of the car, his arm twisted behind him. He tried to stay calm, to explain, but the officers weren't listening anymore. "I'm not resisting," Thomas said clearly. "I am Police Chief Thomas Wilson, and you are making a serious mistake." "Still going with that story?" The older officer growled, handcuffing him roughly. "We'll see what you have to say at the station." Thomas felt the cold metal of handcuffs bite into his wrists. This was bad, but still fixable once they got to the station and he could prove his identity. Then things got much worse. Instead of putting him in the back seat, the officers pulled him away from the car. Through the growing crowd of onlookers, Thomas spotted something that made his blood run cold: a rope. "What are you doing?" he asked, alarm rising in his voice. The older officer was tying one end of the rope to the back of the patrol car. The younger one looked uncomfortable but didn't object. "Teaching a lesson about lying to police," the older officer said. Thomas couldn't believe what was happening. "This is illegal. You cannot do this." "I am—" The rest of his words were lost as the officers secured the other end of the rope to his handcuffs. A woman across the street screamed. Someone yelled about calling 911. "You are making a terrible mistake," Thomas said, looking directly at the younger officer, hoping to reach him. "This is not procedure. This is not right." For a moment, the younger officer seemed to waver. Then the older one got in the driver's seat and started the engine. The car began to move slowly. Thomas had no choice but to walk behind it, handcuffed and tied. Shame and anger burned through him as neighbors watched in horror. Some pulled out phones to record. Others shouted at the officers to stop. The car picked up speed slightly. Thomas stumbled, barely keeping his footing. The rough pavement scraped his shoes. If he fell, he would be dragged. "Stop this car right now." A deep voice boomed from the crowd. An older man in a store uniform had stepped into the street. "That's not how we do things here. Stop the car." Others joined in, moving closer, their voices rising in protest. Phones recorded everything. The patrol car continued for another half block before finally stopping. The older officer got out, face red with anger. "Everyone back up. This is police business." "What kind of police business is this?" someone shouted. "This is wrong." As the crowd grew more vocal, the younger officer finally spoke up. "Maybe we should take him to the station properly, Dave." The older officer, Dave, glared at his partner but seemed to realize the situation was spinning out of control. With clear reluctance, he untied the rope from the car. "Fine. Get in the back seat," he ordered Thomas. As they drove away, Thomas caught glimpses of people on phones talking urgently. His wrists hurt from the handcuffs, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation and shock of what had just happened. At the station, they would discover the truth. Thomas would be identified correctly. But he knew something had broken that couldn't be easily fixed. Not his body, but trust. The very thing he had been hired to rebuild in this town had been shattered before he even started the job. As the car pulled into the police station parking lot, Thomas felt a strange calm settle over him. This terrible incident had shown him exactly why the town needed him. He had experienced firsthand what some community members had been reporting for years. "Take me to Captain Reynolds," Thomas said quietly as they led him from the car. "You don't give orders here," Dave snapped. Thomas looked him directly in the eye. "I will be giving orders here starting Monday. And you, officer, have given me a very clear picture of where to begin." The fluorescent lights of the Riverdale police station buzzed overhead as Officer Dave Peterson filled out paperwork, still fuming. His younger partner, Officer Michael Lee, stood nearby, shifting his weight from one foot to another, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Stop fidgeting," Dave snapped. "You act like we did something wrong." Michael glanced at Thomas, who sat handcuffed to a bench nearby. The man's clothes were dirty from the incident, with a tear in his pants at the knee. Despite this, he sat with a strange dignity, back straight, eyes calmly taking in every detail of the station. "He's still saying he's the new chief," Michael said quietly. Dave rolled his eyes. "And I'm still saying he's full of it. Chief Rodriguez would have told us if his replacement was coming today." At the front desk, the night dispatcher, Gina, was on the phone. She kept looking over at Thomas with an increasingly worried expression. Finally, she hung up and walked quickly to the break room where several officers were gathered. Thomas watched this with interest. The truth was making its way through the system. He winced as he shifted position, his wrists raw from the handcuffs and rope. A young woman in civilian clothes approached him with a first aid kit. "I'm Diane from front desk," she said quietly. "Let me clean those scrapes." "Thank you," Thomas replied. "But I believe I'll need more than a first aid kit." Diane looked uncomfortable. "An ambulance is coming. Captain Reynolds just ordered it." As if on cue, a door slammed open and a tall man with silver hair and a captain's uniform strode into the room. His face was ashen as he looked at Thomas. "Uncuff him," Captain Reynolds ordered, his voice tight. "Now." Dave looked up, confused. "Sir, we haven't processed him yet." "Uncuff him immediately." Reynolds barked with such force that everyone in the room froze. Michael quickly moved to remove the handcuffs. As they came off, Thomas slowly rubbed his wrists, the skin raw and bleeding in places. Captain Reynolds approached, stopping a respectful distance away. "Chief Wilson, He seemed at a loss for words. "I don't know what to say, sir. There's no excuse." Dave's face drained of color. "Chief Wilson?" "Yes, Officer Peterson. The same Chief Wilson who was scheduled to start on Monday. The same Chief Wilson whose photo was in the department-wide email sent 3 weeks ago." Captain Reynolds' voice was dangerously quiet. "The same Chief Wilson who just experienced firsthand the exact kind of policing he was hired to address." The room had gone completely silent. Every officer stared at Thomas with expressions ranging from horror to shame. Thomas slowly stood up, wincing slightly. "I'd like my bag, please." A female officer rushed to retrieve the duffel bag, which had been tagged as evidence. Thomas took it with a nod of thanks and pulled out his wallet. He handed his ID to Captain Reynolds without a word. Reynolds barely glanced at it before handing it back. "Sir, an ambulance is on its way. You need medical attention." "What I need," Thomas said clearly, making sure everyone in the room could hear, "is for Officers Peterson and Lee to be suspended immediately pending investigation." Dave started to protest, but was silenced by a sharp look from Reynolds. "Already done, sir," Reynolds said. "And there will be a full internal affairs investigation." Thomas nodded, then grimaced as pain shot through his shoulder. The adrenaline was wearing off and his body was starting to register every scrape and bruise. The ambulance arrived within minutes. As paramedics guided Thomas to a stretcher, he caught sight of Officer Lee's face. The younger man looked like he might be sick. "This isn't over," Thomas told him quietly as he passed. "But how it ends will depend on what happens next." Outside, camera flashes greeted him. Word had spread quickly. Neighbors from Pine Street had followed the patrol car to the station, and many had their phones out recording. Thomas realized with a sinking feeling that this incident wasn't going to stay within department walls. In the ambulance, a paramedic named Joe carefully examined his injuries. "You've got some nasty abrasions on your wrists and back, possible shoulder strain, and I'm concerned about that bump on your head. We need to check for concussion." Thomas nodded, letting the medical professionals do their work. His mind was racing. This was not how he had planned to begin his tenure as chief, but perhaps it was necessary. He had experienced the problems in the department firsthand rather than reading about them in reports. At Riverdale Memorial Hospital, things moved quickly. A doctor with tired eyes and gentle hands examined him thoroughly, ordering x-rays and scans. "Nothing's broken," she told him after reviewing the results, "but you're going to be sore for weeks. Those abrasions on your wrists need careful cleaning to prevent infection." As nurses cleaned and bandaged his wounds, Thomas heard a commotion in the hallway. The mayor's voice rose above others, demanding to see him. Mayor Linda Warren burst into the room, her usually perfectly arranged appearance showing signs of having been thrown together hastily. Behind her trailed the town manager and 2 council members. "Chief Wilson," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I just heard. I don't even have words." Thomas looked at the group of town officials. "I'd appreciate some privacy while I'm being treated." The mayor nodded quickly. Of course. We'll wait outside, but I want you to know we're already taking action. Those officers will be dealt with according to proper procedure," Thomas finished firmly. "No shortcuts, no cover-ups, everything by the book." The mayor looked taken aback but nodded. "Whatever you think is best." After they left, a nurse finished bandaging his wrists. "You really the new police chief?" she asked. I am. She shook her head. My brother lives on Pine Street. He sent me the video. It's already all over social media. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. How bad? Bad, she said simply. People are angry. Really angry. By the time Thomas was settled in a hospital room for overnight observation, his phone was buzzing constantly with calls and messages. National news outlets were reaching out for statements. The mayor had called 3 more times. Captain Reynolds had messaged that officers Peterson and Lee had been escorted from the building and placed on administrative leave. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. A man in his 60s with dark skin and a worn face stood in the doorway. He wore a police chief's uniform with the name Rodriguez on the badge. May I come in? Chief Rodriguez asked quietly. Thomas nodded. Rodriguez took a seat next to the bed, removing his hat and placing it on his lap. For a long moment he said nothing, just looked at Thomas with sad eyes. 27 years I've been chief here, he finally said. Started back when this town was even smaller, even more set in its ways. I thought... He paused, seeming to search for words. I thought I'd made progress. Maybe you have, Thomas said. But clearly not enough. Rodriguez nodded slowly. I was supposed to show you around on Monday, introduce you to everyone, hand over my office with some dignity. He gave a bitter laugh. Instead, you've seen the worst of us before you've even started. Thomas adjusted himself in the bed, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. Tell me about officers Peterson and Lee. Peterson's been on the force 15 years. Old school. Resistant to change. Lee's a rookie, just 6 months in. Good kid, but easily influenced. And neither recognized me from my photo. Rodriguez looked away. That's on me. I sent the department-wide email, but I should have done more. Made sure everyone knew who you were, what you looked like. A nurse came in to check Thomas's vitals, interrupting their conversation. When she left, Rodriguez stood up. I'll turn in my badge tomorrow instead of Monday, he said. This happened under my watch. Thomas shook his head. No, you'll stay until Monday as planned. I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with here, and you're going to help me. Rodriguez looked surprised, but nodded. Whatever you need. After he left, Thomas turned on the TV in his hospital room. As expected, the story was breaking on local news. Shaky cell phone footage showed him being led behind the patrol car with the rope. The anchors looked appropriately horrified as they reported that the man in the video was actually Riverdale's incoming police chief. Thomas turned off the TV and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring more cameras, more questions, more anger. But it would also bring the first day of the work he had come here to do, fixing a broken system from the inside out, and now he knew exactly where to start. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Thomas Wilson's hospital room, casting thin stripes across his bed. He'd barely slept. Each time he shifted position, pain from his injuries woke him. The doctor had offered stronger pain medication, but Thomas had refused. He needed a clear head for what was coming. A light knock on the door drew his attention. A nurse entered with a breakfast tray and a stack of newspapers. Thought you might want to see these, she said, setting down the papers beside his tray. Thomas nodded his thanks and picked up the top newspaper. His own face stared back at him from the front page, a professional headshot from his previous job, placed next to a blurry cell phone image of him being led behind the police car. The headline read, New Police Chief Dragged by Own Officers. He set the paper down with a sigh and reached for his phone. Overnight, the video had gone viral. National news outlets were covering the story. His voicemail was full, and he had hundreds of unread messages. A text from Captain Reynolds caught his eye. Protesters gathering at station. 50 plus so far. Media vans blocking street. Thomas wasn't surprised. He'd seen enough similar incidents in other cities to know how quickly public anger could build. The difference was this time he was at the center of it all. His phone rang. Mayor Warren again. He answered on the third ring. Chief Wilson, she said, her voice tight with stress. We need to release a statement. People are demanding answers. I'm aware, Thomas said. I'll be at the station this afternoon. The hospital said they're keeping you for observation. I'm signing myself out, he interrupted. This can't wait. After hanging up, Thomas slowly got out of bed, wincing as his bruised body protested. The doctor had warned him to rest for at least a few days. But departments in crisis didn't have the luxury of time. 2 hours later, a police car driven by Captain Reynolds pulled up to the back entrance of the police station. Thomas had insisted on coming through the front, facing the protesters directly, but the captain had been adamant about security concerns. "It's a madhouse out there," Reynolds explained as he helped Thomas from the car. "We've got protesters, counter-protesters, and every news crew within 100 miles. Thomas walked slowly, leaning on a cane the hospital had provided. His body felt like one massive bruise, but he kept his face neutral as they entered the building. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Officers huddled in small groups, conversations stopping abruptly as Thomas passed. Some couldn't meet his eyes. Others stared with open curiosity or concern. In the captain's office, Chief Rodriguez waited alongside two people Thomas didn't recognize. "Chief Wilson," Rodriguez said, standing. "This is Agent Clark from the State Bureau of Investigation and Detective Washington from County Internal Affairs. They've been brought in to conduct an independent investigation." Thomas shook hands with both, noting their professional but wary expressions. They'd been thrust into a volatile situation with careers potentially on the line. "We'll need your full statement," Agent Clark said, getting straight to business, "and medical records documenting your injuries." "You'll have them," Thomas assured her. "But first I need a full briefing on what's happening in my department." Captain Reynolds pulled up a chair for Thomas before beginning. "Officers Peterson and Lee are on administrative leave with pay, pending investigation. The union lawyer is already involved. We've had 6 officers call in sick today. I suspect they're avoiding the media. Dispatches flooded with calls. The mayor's office has received thousands of emails and calls demanding action." "What about Officer Peterson's record?" Thomas asked. "Any previous complaints?" Reynolds and Rodriguez exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Several," Rodriguez admitted. 3 excessive force complaints in the past 5 years. 2 were dismissed after investigation. 1 resulted in a 2-week suspension. Thomas wasn't surprised. "And those files are where?" "In the records room," Reynolds said. "But there's something else you should know. After the video went viral, people started coming forward with other stories. Claims of similar incidents that were never formally reported or were brushed aside. That caught Thomas's attention." "How many?" "Dozens so far," Rodriguez said quietly. "Mostly from Pine Street and the surrounding neighborhoods." The pattern was becoming clear. Thomas turned to Agent Clark. "I want those looked into as part of your investigation." "All of them." She nodded, making a note. A commotion in the hallway interrupted them. Through the glass, Thomas could see a group of officers arguing with a civilian man. The man's voice carried through the door. "I have a right to file a complaint. I saw what happened." Thomas recognized him, the older man from the store who had stepped into the street demanding the officers stop the car. "Let him in," Thomas called out. The officers looked startled but stepped aside. The man entered, still bristling with anger. When he saw Thomas, his expression changed to one of concern. "You okay?" he asked bluntly. "I'll heal," Thomas replied. "Thank you for what you did yesterday." The man shook his head. "Shouldn't have had to do it. Name's Frank, by the way. I run the corner store on Pine. Been watching those 2 officers harass people for years." Thomas introduced Frank to Agent Clark, who arranged to take his statement. As Frank left with her, Thomas turned back to Reynolds and Rodriguez. "I need to see everything. Complaint records, disciplinary files, training protocols, and I want the community relations records, assuming there are any." Rodriguez looked embarrassed. "Community outreach hasn't been a priority." "It will be now," Thomas said firmly. For the next several hours, Thomas reviewed files, building a picture of a department that had gradually isolated itself from parts of the community it served. Complaints from certain neighborhoods were systematically minimized. Officer training focused heavily on force tactics, but barely touched on de-escalation or bias awareness. By late afternoon, Thomas had moved to what would soon be his office. Files covered every surface. Outside, the protest continued to grow. Occasional chants of justice now filtered through the windows. A knock at the door revealed Detective Washington. "Chief Wilson, I've finished preliminary interviews with both officers. I thought you should know. Officer Lee is talking. Says he wants to come clean about this incident and others. That was a break they needed. A single officer speaking up could crack open the culture of silence." "Good," Thomas said. "Keep me updated." After Washington left, Thomas sat back, feeling the weight of pain and exhaustion. His phone buzzed with a message from Mayor Warren. "Town Council emergency meeting tonight. Your presence requested." Before he could reply, another knock came at the door. A young black female officer stood there looking nervous. "Sorry to interrupt, sir. I'm Officer Taylor." Thomas gestured for her to enter. "What can I do for you, Officer Taylor?" She closed the door behind her and spoke quietly. "I've been here 3 years. What happened to you? It's not the first time. There are other incidents that never made it into official reports." Thomas leaned forward. "Tell me." For the next 30 minutes, Officer Taylor outlined a pattern of behavior that made Thomas's blood boil. Certain officers targeting specific neighborhoods, complaints mysteriously disappearing. Officers who spoke up being passed over for promotion or given the worst shifts. "Why are you telling me this now?" Thomas asked when she finished. She looked him directly in the eye. "Because for the first time I think someone might actually do something about it." After she left, Thomas sat in silence for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and called the mayor. "I won't be at the council meeting tonight," he told her. "I'm staying here. This department needs cleaning up from the inside, and it starts now." The council hired me to fix problems," Thomas cut in. "Let me do my job." He ended the call and buzzed for Captain Reynolds. "Get me the personnel files for every officer. I'm going to review them personally tonight, and I want to meet with the entire department tomorrow morning." Reynolds looked startled. "Sir, you should be resting." "This can't wait," Thomas said firmly. "And Captain? Find Officer Taylor. Tell her I want her to help coordinate community meetings starting next week. It's time people in every neighborhood had a direct line to their police chief." That night, Thomas worked late into the evening, ignoring the pain from his injuries. He created 2 lists: officers with troubling patterns who needed close supervision, and officers like Taylor who could help lead change. Around midnight, he stood carefully and walked to the window. The protesters had dwindled to a dedicated few, holding candles in the darkness. Beyond them, he could see news vans with satellite dishes, waiting for the next development. Thomas thought about how quickly his life had changed in just 24 hours. He'd come to Riverdale expecting challenges, but nothing like this. The rope burns on his wrist still stung beneath their bandages, a constant reminder of what had happened. But as he looked out at the protesters demanding change, Thomas felt something unexpected: hope. The incident that had injured his body had also torn away the veil hiding long-standing problems. Sometimes systems needed to break completely before they could be rebuilt. He turned back to his desk and the mountain of files awaiting his attention. There would be resistance. Some officers would fight change every step of the way. The road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time in years, people were paying attention. And Thomas Wilson intended to use that attention to build something better from the ashes of what had happened. Morning. Light streamed through the windows of the Riverdale Police Department's largest meeting room. Every chair was filled. Officers in uniform sat shoulder to shoulder, an unusual silence hanging over them. At the front of the room stood an empty podium. The door opened and Thomas Wilson entered. His face still showed bruises from the incident 3 days earlier. He walked with a cane, his movements careful and measured. But there was nothing weak in his posture or in the steady gaze he swept across the room. Captain Reynolds stood to introduce him, but Thomas shook his head slightly. He didn't need an introduction. He placed a folder on the podium, then looked out at the officers, his officers now. "Good morning," he said, his voice firm and clear. "For those who haven't figured it out yet, I'm Thomas Wilson. Your new chief." No one laughed. No one even smiled. 3 days ago, 2 of your colleagues dragged me behind their patrol car with a rope. He let the words hang in the air. "Today, I'm not here to fire everyone. I'm not here to give speeches about how terrible you all are. I'm here to talk about how we fix this department." Opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "I've spent the last 2 days reviewing every complaint filed against this department in the past 5 years. I've gone through personnel files, training records, and arrest statistics. I've spoken with community members and city officials, and I've found a pattern that should concern every person in this room." Thomas held up the papers. "These aren't just complaints. These are warnings, signs that we've lost the trust of the people we're supposed to protect." Some officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared straight ahead, expressions unreadable. "I need to be clear about something," Thomas continued. "What happened to me wasn't just about 2 officers making a bad decision. It was about a system that allowed those decisions to happen. A system we're all part of." He stepped around the podium, moving closer to them despite his injuries. Every one of you has a choice to make. You can be part of the problem, or you can be part of the solution. There is no middle ground anymore. Thomas outlined his plan. New training protocols focusing on de-escalation and bias awareness. Community outreach programs in every neighborhood. A civilian oversight board with real power. Body cameras for every officer with footage regularly reviewed. These changes aren't suggestions, he said firmly. They're happening. Starting today. As the meeting ended, Thomas asked Captain Reynolds and Officer Taylor to stay behind. When the room had cleared, he sat down, finally allowing himself to show the fatigue and pain he'd been hiding. Captain, I need you to schedule individual meetings with every officer over the next 2 weeks. I want to hear directly from them. Their concerns, their ideas, their commitment level. Reynolds nodded. And Officer Taylor? Thomas turned to the young officer who had come forward with information. I'd like you to head up our new community engagement team. You've shown courage in speaking up. That's exactly what we need right now. Taylor looked surprised but nodded. Yes, sir. Thank you. After they left, Thomas sat alone for a few minutes, gathering his strength for what came next. His phone buzzed with a message from Agent Clark. Officers Peterson and Lee ready for separate interviews whenever you're ready. The interviews would be recorded as part of the ongoing investigation. Thomas had requested to speak with both officers, not as their chief but as the victim of their actions. Officer Lee was brought in first. The young officer looked like he hadn't slept in days. His uniform was perfectly pressed, but his face was haggard with stress. Sit down, Thomas said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Lee sat stiffly, hands folded in his lap. Chief Wilson, I want to say how sorry. Thomas held up a hand. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to understand. Walk me through what happened that day. Every decision, every thought. For the next 30 minutes, Lee talked. He described how Peterson had spotted Thomas walking through Pine Street and decided he looked suspicious. How Peterson had taken the lead while Lee followed his senior officer's example. How he had doubts when Thomas claimed to be the new chief but didn't speak up. And the rope? Thomas asked quietly. Lee's voice faltered. It was Peterson's idea. Said it would teach you a lesson about lying to police. I knew it was wrong. I knew it, but I didn't stop it. Why not? Lee looked down. Because I was afraid. Not of him exactly, but of not fitting in, of being labeled a problem. He looked up, meeting Thomas's gaze. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. Thomas nodded slowly. What happens now is up to you, Officer Lee. There will be consequences for your actions. But how you move forward from this point, that's your choice. After Lee left, Thomas took a moment to collect himself before Officer Peterson was brought in. Unlike Lee, Peterson showed no signs of remorse or stress. He sat down with an air of defiance, arms crossed over his chest. Let's cut to the chase, Peterson said before Thomas could speak. My union rep says this whole thing will blow over. A few weeks of paid leave, maybe a transfer to another department, and it's done. Thomas studied him for a long moment. Is that what happened with your previous complaints? They just blew over? Something flickered in Peterson's eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. 3 excessive force complaints in 5 years. All involving residents from the same neighborhoods. All handled internally with minimal consequences. Peterson shrugged. People make false complaints all the time. Like I did, when I told you I was the new chief. That hit home. Peterson shifted uncomfortably. That was different. You didn't have ID. And that justified dragging me behind your car? Look, Peterson leaned forward, dropping his voice. Between us, we both know how this works. You'll make a big show of cleaning house. The media will move on to the next story and things will go back to normal. They always do. Thomas smiled slightly. Not this time. He stood up, leaning on his cane. Officer Peterson, as of this moment, you are suspended without pay pending the outcome of criminal charges being filed against you. Peterson's face flushed with anger. You can't do that. I just did. Thomas moved toward the door. The district attorney will be in touch about the charges. I suggest you find a good lawyer. Later that afternoon, Thomas met with the mayor and town council in an emergency session. The mood was tense as he laid out his plans for department reform. These changes will be expensive, one council member protested. Body cameras, additional training, community programs. Where will the money come from? Thomas looked around the table. Where will the money come from if we do nothing? How much will the inevitable lawsuits cost? How much is public trust worth to you? No one had a good answer for that. As evening fell, Thomas found himself back at the hospital for a follow-up appointment. His doctor frowned at his vital signs. Your blood pressure is too high. You're pushing yourself too hard, she scolded. These injuries need time to heal. Time is the one thing I don't have right now, Thomas replied. On his way out, he passed the hospital's small chapel. On impulse, he stepped inside. The quiet space was empty except for an elderly woman sitting in the back row. She looked up as he entered. You're him, aren't you? The police chief from the news. Thomas nodded tiredly. My grandson lives on Pine Street, she said. He's 16. Been stopped by police 4 times this year, just walking home from school. She studied Thomas's face. You really think you can change things? I'm going to try, he said honestly. She nodded slowly. That's all anyone can ask, I suppose. When Thomas left the hospital, he was surprised to find Frank, the store owner who had intervened during the incident, waiting by his car. Thought you might need this, Frank said, holding out a paper bag. Food from my store. Bet you haven't eaten all day. Thomas accepted the bag with genuine gratitude. Thank you. Community's talking, Frank said. Some folks don't believe anything will change. Others are hopeful. Wanted you to know I'm organizing a meeting. People from the neighborhood who want to work with you, not just protest against the department. I'd like to be there, Thomas said. Frank nodded. Good. Because real change isn't just about what happens inside that police station. It's about all of us working together. As Thomas drove back to his hotel, he reflected on the day's events. He had confronted the officers responsible for his injuries. He had addressed his department for the first time. He had begun the process of creating accountability. But Frank was right. Real change would require more than new policies or disciplinary actions. It would require rebuilding trust that had been broken long before a rope was tied to a patrol car. Thomas touched the bandage on his wrist, feeling the pain beneath it. His injuries would heal eventually. The deeper wounds in the community would take much longer. But for the first time since arriving in Riverdale, he felt something close to certainty that healing was possible. 1 year later, Thomas Wilson stood in front of the Riverdale Police Department, watching as workers installed a new sign above the entrance. The department's redesigned emblem featured a shield with a handshake at its center, a symbol of the partnership between police and community that had become the cornerstone of his leadership. Looks good, said Captain Reynolds, now Deputy Chief Reynolds. Standing beside him, Thomas nodded. Better than good. It's honest. A lot had changed in 12 months. Thomas no longer needed a cane. Though wet weather still made his shoulder ache where he'd been injured, the physical scars had faded more than he'd expected. Other marks ran deeper. Ready for the ceremony? Reynolds asked. Today marked the first anniversary of what locals now simply called the incident. Rather than letting the date pass quietly, Thomas had decided to use it as an opportunity to showcase the department's transformation and recommit to the work still ahead. Inside, the station buzzed with activity. New faces mixed with familiar ones. Nearly a third of the force had either retired or transferred out in the past year. Some by choice, others encouraged to leave after investigations revealed troubling patterns of behavior. In their place came officers drawn to the department's new approach, including more women and people of color than Riverdale PD had ever employed before. Thomas made his way to his office, nodding to Officer Taylor, now Sergeant Taylor, who headed the community engagement team. Her promotion had raised eyebrows among some old-timers, but her results spoke for themselves. Complaints were down 60% in neighborhoods that had historically had the most friction with police. On Thomas's desk sat a formal invitation to speak at a national conference on police reform. Next to it was a handwritten letter from a teenage boy thanking the chief for how an officer had handled a situation involving him and his friends. Small victories, but meaningful ones. A knock at the door pulled Thomas from his thoughts. Officer Chen, one of the new hires, stood in the doorway. Sir, he's here. Thomas took a deep breath. Send him in. Michael Lee entered the office, looking markedly different from the nervous rookie who had participated in Thomas's humiliation a year ago. He no longer wore a police uniform. Instead, he was dressed in civilian clothes, his posture more relaxed but still respectful. Chief Wilson, Lee said, extending his hand. Thomas shook it firmly. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Lee." After being suspended, Lee had faced a difficult choice. The district attorney had offered him a deal: testify against former Officer Peterson in exchange for avoiding criminal charges himself. Lee had taken the deal, providing crucial testimony that led to Peterson's conviction on charges of assault and civil rights violations. Peterson was now serving a 3-year sentence. Lee had resigned from the force as part of his agreement. Unlike Peterson, he had shown genuine remorse for his actions and had cooperated fully with investigators. "How's the community college program going?" Thomas asked as they sat down. "Good," Lee said. "I'm halfway through my social work degree. And the talks? Still doing those?" Lee nodded. 3 police academies so far. I tell them about that day, what I did wrong, what I should have done differently, how I failed to stand up when I knew something was wrong. He paused. "It's not easy, but it feels necessary." Thomas studied the younger man's face. "That's why I asked you here today. I'd like you to speak at the ceremony." Lee looked shocked. "You want me there? After what I did?" "This isn't just about celebrating progress," Thomas explained. "It's about acknowledging where we started and how far we still have to go. Your perspective matters." After Lee left, Thomas gathered his notes for the ceremony. Through the window, he could see people beginning to assemble in the park across from the station. Community members, officers, local officials, and media had all turned out for the event. Among the crowd, Thomas spotted Frank from the corner store, now head of the civilian oversight board that reviewed police conduct and body camera footage. Nearby stood Mrs. Washington, the elderly woman he'd met in the hospital chapel, who now led community workshops where residents and officers could talk honestly about their experiences and expectations. As Thomas crossed the street to the park, a young officer fell into step beside him. "Nervous, sir?" the officer asked. Thomas smiled slightly. "Always am before these things." The crowd quieted as Thomas took the podium. Camera flashes punctuated the moment. "1 year ago," he began, "I came to Riverdale as your new police chief and experienced firsthand what many in this community had been reporting for years." He paused, looking out at the diverse faces watching him. "What happened to me was terrible. But what came after, that's what we're here to talk about today." Thomas outlined the changes: mandatory body cameras with footage regularly reviewed, new training in de-escalation techniques, a use-of-force policy that was among the strictest in the state, community oversight with real power, regular neighborhood meetings where officers listened more than they spoke. "These aren't just policies on paper," he emphasized. "They're a new way of thinking about what it means to protect and serve. And they're working." He shared the statistics: complaints down, community trust indicators up, crime rates stable or falling in most categories. "But numbers don't tell the whole story," Thomas continued. "Real change happens in moments most people never see. It happens when an officer takes the time to talk down a tense situation instead of escalating it. When a teenager sees a police car and feels protected rather than targeted. When officers and residents work together to solve problems instead of viewing each other with suspicion." Thomas introduced several speakers, community members, officers, even Michael Lee, whose honest account of his failures and subsequent journey brought a hushed attention to the crowd. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a simple monument, a piece of rope encased in clear resin, mounted on a stone base. Inscribed on a plaque were the words, "To remember where we've been, to never go back, to move forward together." Some had questioned the wisdom of such a stark reminder, but Thomas had insisted. "We don't heal by forgetting," he'd told the planning committee. "We heal by remembering and doing better." As the crowd dispersed, a reporter approached Thomas. "Chief Wilson, does it bother you that your legacy in Riverdale will always be tied to what happened to you that first day?" Thomas considered the question. "My legacy isn't what happened to me," he said finally. "It's what we all did afterward." Later that evening, Thomas walked alone through Pine Street, the same route he'd taken a year earlier as a newcomer to town. The changes were subtle but significant. The basketball hoop had been replaced with a proper backboard. The corner store had a fresh coat of paint. Officers Williams and Chen greeted residents by name as they patrolled on foot. A boy on a bicycle stopped beside Thomas. "You're the police chief, right? The one from the videos?" Thomas nodded. "That's me." My brother wants to be a cop now, the boy said. Because of how you changed things. Before Thomas could respond, the boy pedaled away, leaving him with an unexpected lump in his throat. Back at the station, Thomas stopped in front of the glass case in the lobby. The rope inside looked oddly ordinary, just a length of braided fiber that had once been used to inflict pain and humiliation. Now it served a different purpose. Thomas thought about how a single rope had exposed decades of problems that might otherwise have remained hidden. How his own wounds had created an opening for healing much deeper injuries in the community. How sometimes the most painful moments contained the seeds of necessary change. Outside, the new sign caught the light of the setting sun. Shield and handshake, police and community. Protection and partnership. Not perfect, not finished, but transformed. Thomas touched the scar on his wrist, barely visible now. Some marks faded with time. Others changed you forever. The trick was knowing the difference and using both to build something better than what came before.